The Power Factor Show with Rick, Steve, and Caleb. Episode 82.
You can find this podcast and others at Gun Rights Radio Network, gunrightsradio.com. Podcasting freedom.
Brought to you by Safariland and Hodgdon, the gunpowder people.
Hey everyone, welcome to Power Factor. Today we are going to look at reloading on a single stage press that we talked about before in the earlier episodes on shotshell reloading and components. Today I'm going to go through and demonstrate and talk about reloading on my MEC Sizemaster, and hopefully this won't come out sounding like an infomercial for MEC or anything like that, but I've used MEC products basically back when I first started reloading in the very early 70s. As I mentioned before, I was using a Lee Loadall, and my dad had I think it was a MEC 600 Junior way back in the day for reloading 12 gauge, which it was, in my experience, considerably faster reloading on his MEC 600 Junior than it was on my Lee Loadall. So at any rate, when I decided to buy a press for myself, and this was probably about 20 years ago, I decided to go with a MEC press, since that's what I had a lot of experience with. And rather than going with the progressive press, and they have a bunch of different presses, you can go to their website and check them out. But rather than going with the progressive press, I decided to stick with what is kind of a single stage press. This has a few upgraded features over the 600 Junior. Primarily the sizing mechanism where it sizes the hole. This uses a Collet sizer, which you'll see here in a bit, versus kind of like a sizing ring that the 600 Junior has. And then this also has a automatic primer feed, which really speeds things up quite a bit. I remember with my dad's 600 Junior that you had to like place a primer every time and then seat it, place a primer every time and seat it. This one has a mechanism where it automatically drops a primer for you. Which is quite a bit faster and really speeds things up. And I was thinking from the standpoint of, when I was looking at buying a presser, I didn't want to spend a whole lot of money on it, but I also wanted something that would go fairly quick or allow me to load fairly quickly. And as I had mentioned before in the other episode with John, I'm kind of beginning to reach the pain point in terms of how much I'm shooting and how much I'm reloading. And I may end up going to, something like the 366 that John has here in the near future. We'll see. I'm not quite there yet, but depending on how much I'm shooting in a given week, I'm getting really close to it. So right now, my approach is to load up a whole bunch. I'll go into, like little mini reloading sessions, and I'll load up a bunch of shot shells and, put them away and store them, and then it doesn't feel quite as bad, but boy, when you come out here and reload, about an hour's worth of time and you're ready for a break. So this press is about 20 years old. Some of the giveaways, this is a really old press, are two things. One is that the new Sizemasters have a wood handle on here as opposed to a plastic handle. But the other big giveaway that this is a really old press is that this has metal dies. The new Sizemasters, actually all of the new MEC presses, have something called a Shotshell die for doing the pre-crimp and the sizing. This has the old metal dies. Now, whether the metal's better or worse, I don't know. Some people actually say that they prefer the Shotshell. Other people say they prefer the metal. The one difference, though, in terms of the pre-crimp, is that on the newer ones, in my case here, I have mine set up for a 8-point crimp. So when I want to change my 8-point crimp to a 6-point crimp, I have to unscrew my pre-crimp die here and take out, and I have it in here right now, my 8-point crimp, but my 8-point crimp, and put in a 6-point crimp, and then go and put the whole thing back together again. The Shotshell ones have a snap-on, snap-off thing, so you basically just pop this thing off, pop the new one on, and you're off and running. Yeah, mine's not quite as fast, but it still, for the most part, gets the job done. And I have not had any problems with it. You can shim this thing up and down with washers. I think with the new ones, there's a screw here that you can run up and down to adjust the pre-crimp height. And in terms of the final die here, it does the final crimp, and also in my case it activates the primer bar here. So, but we'll get to that in a bit. So first off, I wanted to kind of back up here. In the earlier episodes, I had mentioned with John that I was looking into possibly exploring reloading 3/4 ounce loads just as an experiment, and the primary reason for it is really twofold: cost reduction and also recoil reduction. Now I'll admit I'm shooting 7/8 loads right now, and 7/8 loads at around 1230 feet per second don't have a whole lot of recoil. It's very light, but the 3/4 ounce load will probably even be lighter yet. There's a kind of an interesting relationship in terms of recoil and shot weight, and basically what it gets down to is that for every 1/8 ounce that you drop in terms of weight, it's equivalent to 130 feet per second. So this sounds really confusing. I'll give you an example. If you were shooting, let's say, an 1 ounce load at 1200 feet per second, okay? If you drop to a 7/8 ounce load, you can go up to 1330 or 1340 feet per second and have the equivalent recoil, the felt recoil between the two. So that's kind of the relationship that you're working with there. So for here, I'm running a 7/8 ounce load at roughly 1200 feet per second. If I drop down to a 3/4 ounce load, I could effectively run the velocity up to 1330 feet per second and have the same recoil, but I'm not going to go that fast, and John probably will, and I know John's going to do the same experiment, I think, that I am. But at any rate, I'm going to go off and do the experiment and come back, and at some point, probably one of the future episodes, I'll mention how it went. The other point is that by dropping the shot weight down to 3/4 of an ounce, I'm now going to be able to load a lot more rounds per 25-pound bag of shot. So as an example, if you load 1 ounce loads, and I'm trying to go off the top of my head here because I didn't look this up in advance, but if you go for a 1 ounce load, you can roughly load 400 shot shells at a 1 ounce load. If you're running 7/8 ounce load, you roughly load, I think it's 454 or something like that, give or take, shot shells. If you load 3/4 ounce load, you're now up to around 518 or something like that, 510, somewhere around that figure. So you can see that going from a 1 ounce to a 3/4 ounce, you're loading, roughly another 100 shot shells. And this all adds up in terms of cost. It's one of the ways of getting your costs down in terms of reloading shot shells. So I'm just also kind of curious to go off and do this. But to do this requires that you use a special wad. So after I got the idea of going to, do the experiment of 3/4 ounce loads, I thought, well, okay, I'm going to need some wads to do this. And I contacted the folks at Claybuster Wads, and I've been using Claybuster wads for the last 20 years. I started using Claybusters back in the early 90s. And have stayed with them pretty much for the duration. As I mentioned recently, I played around with the Windjammer 8 pedal wads, but I've gone back to the Claybuster. So I contacted Claybuster, and I was very surprised that I actually got a response from Ron Bug Jr., who is the president of the company, and he sent me out a sample of the gray wad, which is the CB, I think it's a 0178-12. Which is the equivalent of the Winchester WAA-12L wad, the light wad that Winchester produces. And then Claybuster has also come out with a new wad, which is a CB0175-12, which is specifically designed for 3/4 ounce loads. A lot of times guys will use this for 7/8 ounce loads, and as John will probably mention when he does his episode on progressives, that this wad is pretty much the go-to wad for a lot of the bunker trap guys. They love this wad, and I have a feeling that I'll probably be switching to this wad once I get through my 5,000 of my my Claybuster 1100 wads that I have, and I'll see here a little bit later. So at any rate, this wad is a 3/4 ounce wad, designed very similar to the 7/8 ounce wad, and from what I can see, the dimensions are identical. The only difference is there's a little bump in the bottom of the shot cup to take up some of the internal volume capacity. So at any rate, I want to thank Ron with Claybuster for sending these out to me. Like I said, great company to work with. Been using their products for a long time. Really happy with them. Very little. One thing that shotgunners will always refer to is plastic fouling, because they're shoving a plastic wad down the barrel, and you'll get plastic fouling or plastic streaks down the barrel. And with the Claybusters, I found very little of that. So, and one of the nice things about Claybuster products, they sent me a brochure here, but Claybuster has a lot of different wads for the popular style. So they have the Remington style, Federal style, Windjammer style. So they actually have their own clone of the Windjammer, and then a lot of the different copies or clones of the Winchester style wads. So you can go through and take a look at that and find out basically a good replacement wad for whatever you're using. So if you're right now, let's say using say a Winchester W12 AA12 SL wad right now, and you're probably paying, I'm guessing, about $8 or $9 for a bag of 250. You can get the Claybuster CB1100 wad, which is what I'm using, for around $8 or $9 for 500. So it's roughly half the cost. They also sent me a hat. And I will admit I'm not much of a hat guy, as you probably have noticed in past episodes, but Rick and Caleb are hat guys. I understand in Rick's case the reason why he probably is a hat guy, but we won't get into any of that. So I was going to give the hat away, and I thought, okay, well, we need to come up with an interesting way about going about giving this away. So I came up with a kind of a trivia question for you. There's going to be 3 parts to this. You need to get all 3 parts to get the right answer. And let's let this roll to, let's say, I don't know, the middle of August or so, in terms of time frame. And for everybody who submits the correct answers, and again, it's going to be 3 here that you need to get, we'll put all the names into a hat and draw it, and whoever gets it will get the hat. We'll put the names in that hat, and you can win that hat. So here's the trivia question. I have some wads, or I'm sorry, some primers here. There is something very unique about these primers. So what I want to know is, what is it that is unique about these particular primers? What were they primarily used in? What hole were they used in? And what was I doing with them? Now for that last part, that last question there, in other words, where was I using them, or how was I using them, or what was my application? I'd mentioned before in previous episodes what gauge and what shotgun I was shooting. I'll give you a little hint about these. These primers are 40 years old. Okay, they're not around anymore. You can't find them. These were purchased from a store called Payless, which is not Payless Shoes. It was almost a drugstore. They were $1.49 for 100 primers, so try to find that. But they're 40 years old, and that will be a little bit of a clue of the time frame of when they were used and why they were used. So again, I want to know what's unique about them. That's the first question. What hole were they used in? That's the second question. And you need to be a little bit specific about that, not just say it's a Winchester hole. Because you can see, if you look really close on here, it says something on here that might lead you to believe something, which would be also another clue. And so what hole were they used in? And again, the third part is what was my application? So, and whoever comes up with the right answer will win the hat. So I'll let you know how the 3/4 ounce experiment goes here and in the near future. During some episode, we'll talk about that of how that works. My primary concern is how it breaks targets, and from what I've heard, 3/4 ounce loads bust them just as well as everything else. So what I'll do is I'll load them up. I'll probably chrono them, check them out for velocity, compare them to my existing 7/8 ounce load to make sure that at least I'm matching that part of the variable there. I want to try to keep both of them around 1,230 feet per second, give or take. And then I'll go out and shoot, let's say, 16-yard trap with them, which is fairly consistent. And we'll see how they break targets. So I'll let you know. Okay, so now we'll get down to the nitty-gritty of the reloading thing. You first start out, obviously, with all of your component selection. So based on the components you have, you need to figure out your load data. So as I mentioned before, I'm using the Remington, what they call, and it's called the gun club hole, but a lot of times you'll find it marked as gun clubs. Some of these you'll find listed as, sport loads. Sometimes they'll call them the dove and quail load or something like that. The green holes are the same as the black hole, so that doesn't matter. You'll find ones here with 6-point crimps, you'll find ones with brass heads, but basically in a nutshell, they're all the same hole. It also happens to be the same hole as the Remington Premier and also the same hole as the Remington STS. So I'm starting out with those particular holes. My primers are Winchester, the Winchester 209 W209 Shotshell primer. And then in terms of wads, I'm using the Claybuster CB1100 wad, CB1100-12, which is a 1 ounce wad. Now the other wads that I have here, which I'm not going to be using today, are the CB1118-12 wad, which is a 1 1/8 ounce wad. These wads are actually about 20 years old. I still have them from 20 years ago when I was reloading 1 1/8 ounce loads. And it's kind of funny because I'm kind of experiencing the same thing that I did many years ago. Started out with 1 1/8 ounce, and then in 1990 or so, or 92 when I was shooting, I had heard about how light recoil 1 ounce were, so I basically put those aside, which I'm going to do now, and switched to the 1 ounce wads, and was shooting those. And now recently I started shooting the 7/8 ounce wad, or 7/8 ounce loads, so I'm decreasing the load even more. And these happen to work okay for the 7/8 ounce loads, but you're going to get a little bit of a dished crimp, which you're going to see here when we get a little bit further on. The crimp kind of gets pointed down in. And that's where a smaller or better wad would work out, and that's where I can get into the new Claybuster CB, I think it's a 0178, which is a dedicated 7/8 ounce wad, which should eliminate my dished crimp problem, and that wad will also work for 3/4 ounce. But then with 3/4, I'll probably have the same dished crimp, same problem, again, that I'm having with these for the same reason. So we'll see how that goes. And the 0175, the new wad that they have out, should eliminate the dished crimp with a 3/4 dedicated 3/4 ounce. So I usually take these and just put some of them into a bin that I have here when I reload and pull them out of that. So I'll do that here real quick. I like to keep things fairly close here as I'm reloading. The next thing that you need to do is to figure out what you're going to do for load data. So I pulled up, you don't need to really see the details of this, but from the Hodgdon loading manual for this particular set of components, the Remington STS Nitro 27 Gun Club plastic, 7/8 ounce load, which is what I'm loading, using clays. My clays powder is up here. It says it gives you 3 velocities, 1200, actually 4 velocities, 1200, 1250, 1300, and 1350 feet per second using the WA12SL wad. So they're specifically stating the Winchester wad here, but again, since the CB1100 is a clone of that, you can, basically the information is the same. So whenever you see the WA12SL wad, that's the same thing as the CB1100. So I like to target my loads around 1200 to 1250 feet per second. There's something, and I'm not going to talk about it today, but there's something called hot core patterning. It's a issue with 7/8, or we'll call it a light charge shot shells. So we're going to say 7/8 ounce loads. If you get the velocity too low, the pattern becomes very, very solid in the center. We'll talk more about the whys and wherefores and how to get around this probably in an episode on chokes or something like that. But basically right now the rule is try to keep it above 1200 feet per second. So I'm going to probably run around 1230 or so feet per second. They give a load here of 1200 feet per second of 15.9 grains at 7,100 psi. A load of 1250 feet per second of 17.1 grains of 8,900 psi. And at 1300 feet per second of 18.2 grains at 10,000 psi. And they do not list a load at 1350, probably because the pressure gets too high. And again, if I remember, the max for 12 gauge is 11,500 psi. So I'm going to try to target something between 1200 and 1250, and that's where it gets into bushing selection. With the MEC presses, you do not have the ability to infinitely adjust your powder charge. The way the MEC presses work is you buy a particular bar, and the bars are marked based on the shot capacity. So I have a 118 bar here, and this is back in the day when I was throwing 1 ounce and 1/8. And then I have a 1 ounce bar. This is marked 100. This is for 1 ounce loads, and right now I'm running a 7/8 ounce bar in the press. But basically the way it works is that you pick a bushing, and this is the powder bushing, you stick it in the bar, and then put that into the press, and that's your combination in terms of shot and powder. So I need to pick a bushing that gives me the right velocity here, right powder weight here, based on the Hodgson data. So I'm looking at something between 15.9 and 17.1. So Hodgson has a bushing chart, and MEC has a bushing chart, and in my particular instance, I have found the MEC data more closely follows the bushing size and thrown weight than the Hodgson data. I don't know why. It could be this particular batch of clays that I have is maybe more dense or less dense or whatever the case may be, but right now I'm finding it's following this much closer. So based on that here, I see that there is a charge of 29 bushing gives me 16.2. A 30 bushing gives me a charge of 16.7, and a 31 gives me 17.3. 17.3, if Hodgson's data is correct, that's going to be well over 1250. So I'm going to use the number 30 bushing, which is 16.7, which should give me right around 1230 feet per second. So I have my number 30 bushing installed in my charge bar right now, and that's ready to go. So I'm going to set those bushings aside here. Now, one of the other options that's available is something called a universal charge bar. The people who use MEC reloaders know about these things, and they either have a love-hate relationship with them. It's kind of interesting. It basically allows you to dial up anything, any particular charge and any particular shot weight that you want, and tweak it in, basically. So you can, I mean, perfectly dial up 17.1 grains at 1 ounce or 7/8 of an ounce or whatever it is that you're throwing. And this bar will actually allow me to do my 3/4 ounce experiment, because I do not have a 3/4 ounce bar from MEC. They do make one, but I don't have a 3/4 ounce bar, and I'm not really sure if that's the direction I really truly am going to go in the future. So as a way to do this experiment, I can set this bar up for 3/4 of an ounce in terms of the shot, and then tweak in the powder to get exactly what the charge data or the load data says I should be in terms of velocity, which I don't know right now because I haven't checked that part out yet. But at any rate, that is an option for people who want to play around with that. But again, like I said, there's a love-hate relationship with them, and people, from my experience, my dad had one of these on his 600 Junior, and they seemed to be kind of sticky. They were not as smooth as the in operation, which you'll see here with the MEC bars. And I think that's the main complaint against them, is this, it's not as smooth operation as the MEC charge bar is. So you may want to get one, you may not want to get one, but it does give you some more options that you may not have had before. So in terms of the presses here, I wanted to mention one thing. On Shotgun World Forum, which I'm one of the members, or a member of that forum, there's a guy there that goes by the name of Curly No Hair, and he is literally a expert on MEC reloaders. I mean, he knows everything seemingly about them. He has published a really good pictorial takedown and lubrication and adjustment process for the different MEC reloaders, and particularly get into the Collet sizer, which you'll see here in a little bit on this press when we get it in operation. But the Collet sizer basically resizes the brass head on the hull, and it can be a little bit finicky about getting it set up, and also really finicky about keeping it properly lubed. And people will go through all sorts of different lubes that they find that do and don't work. I'm using anti-seize compound on it, and I found that that works out really well in terms of keeping the Collet freely operating, not sticky, and working very well. So I would recommend that any of you that are running MEC presses go to Shotgun World, go to the reloading forum. At the very top of that, there is a sticky link there, and I think it's titled something like, all the information that you need to know about MEC presses or something to that effect. It's a list of all the threads that have had to do in the past with the MEC presses, and one of them that you'll see in there is basically maintenance, lubrication, and setting up of the MEC presses. So, and Curly wrote all that information. It's a really great resource for anybody who has the particular MEC presses. I took mine, after reading all the information, I took mine last year and completely tore it down to the very last part. replaced the main spring in this thing, lubed everything, and got it up ready to go for basically all my shot shell reloading. Knowing that I was going to get back into the game, I wanted to make sure my press was ready to run. So we'll start out here and load up the 2 powder hopper and shot hopper. You'll want to also notice here is that I have something that you don't normally get on one of these things, which is a powder baffle. And obviously the idea behind a powder baffle is that it kind of, in terms of the weight of the powder on the charge, if you're not running a whole lot of powder in your powder hopper, then you'll find that you're not getting a lot of force on that. And based on these are based on volume as opposed to weight. Without all that, effectively gravity working against it, you can see that you can have light charges, as opposed to if you had a really full hopper. So the powder baffle to a certain degree helps alleviate that problem. So start out here, made myself a nice little funnel out of a water bottle here, cut the top off. Works out really nice for this. So we'll start out and put in some Hodgson clays. Okay, so we'll start out and put in some clays here. Get that going. Make sure I don't dump it all over the floor, anything stupid like that. And again, I like to fill my powder hopper about halfway up. This is a little over half, but that's fine, it's no problem. And then I pull that off. And then I will do the shot. And I take my shot and put it in, get about 25 pounds in here into an old cat litter bottle. Works out really well for this. This is gonna get noisy. And the other thing is you want to make sure that you hit this thing, but there's nothing worse than it's like when the shot starts going, it's very hard to stop it, and if you miss that thing, you're going to have shot all over the place. And if you're loading inside your house, your wife is not going to like you when she comes to vacuuming. Okay. So that's good for now. The other nice thing kind of about the mech loader is that you can also then swing the powder and the shot away and change your bar, because if you all of a sudden decide, oh crap, I really don't want to use that particular shot bar or the powder bar or whatever, you can swing it down, swing these all the way down, get the shot and the powder out of here, change your bar out or change the shot bushing back out and go back up into an operating mode. So now we'll put the primers in, move this bar down and grab my primers. You take them, and usually you can load the whole entire thing. When I say the whole entire thing, I'll 100, or you can do short. And I'm not going to load 100 shells today, so I'm just going to probably do about 3 rows, which should be 30 shot shells. So undo that, the primers fall. Flip the top door open, and then one trick I've learned recently here is taking a rubber band and just putting it over the top here, which just kind of keeps the door shut and stays out of the way. So move it back up. I'm going to put my safety glasses on here, and the other thing I want to do is initially, and I realize it's probably going to start throwing the right amount of shot and the right amount of powder, but since I've just put powder and shot into an empty charge bar, I just want to cycle it through once or twice just to get basically everything cleared out. Get it, or I should say filled up more than anything. I'm going to put an empty hole in here. We have not deprimed or done anything with this. I just empty hole, pull that down. That dumps the powder. Now, one key thing that you want to watch out here, because you don't want to turn around and shove this back the other way and dump shot, because now I'm going to be mixing shot and powder, and there's nothing more of a headache than that. So I'm going to set that aside and put a different hole in here, dump the shot. And at this point, I'm pretty confident that this thing's all full now. So I'm going to put the shot back into the shot hopper and the powder back into the powder hopper, and we're ready to go. So we're ready to start reloading at this point. Now, one thing is that I have not dropped a primer into the second station here, and this is an automatic primer feed, and the primer feed is activated by when you move your hole around to the very last station here. When you crimp it, the die comes up, hits a lever, and drops a primer down. So for the very first operation here, you really need to prime the primer manually. So I'll pull this thing down, reach under here, pull the lever down, and drop a primer into the very first station. So at this point, it's ready to go. I'm going to start out here loading somewhat slowly so you can see the different various operations of what's going on, and I'll show you what I refer to as at speed. I want to caution you against one thing. Is I've seen videos of guys on the web about doing reloading on a mech, and the guy, well, some of them, I shouldn't say one guy, but some of them are just slamming the bars back around left and right and throwing, you know, the main charge handle down and really abusing the press, trying to demonstrate that they can go fast. You can go, and I'm not going to say fast, but you can go quickly without, you know, being abusive to your press. And I want you to keep that in mind, because if you start, you know, you start doing it and you're going to make mistakes, you're going to, you know, get into trouble. Or start jamming wads or things like that, or having really poorly formed holes, and not only that, but also from the standpoint of just abuse on the press. So you can go quick, but you don't need to really, you know, beat your press up to go quick either. So keep that in mind when you're doing your reloading. So I'm going to start out here and put the hole into the very first station, and we'll get a better angle on this here in a bit, or probably just do a still shot on it, you'll see that. But the very first station is a collet sizer. The collet sizer, the specs actually on the diameter of, well, actually we'll do this for fun, we'll see how this works out here, if I can find my micrometer. So this is I believe this is a once fired hole, but right now the diameter of it is measuring 0.810. Okay, so you don't want to go and overly work the brass on your holes. SAMI specs say, I think anything, the size of the base here is like 80, and again I'm going to get this wrong because I didn't go off and look at it, but I think it's like 802 to 810, something like that. The idea, and again, since I'm shooting an over-under, I don't have the tight chamber problems that you might have with an autoloader or a pump or something like that, so as long as it drops into my barrel, I'm good. I usually size down to about 807, 807, 808, or somewhere in there. You may want to size smaller for an autoloader or for a pump, but the idea is that the harder you work this, the harder that collet's got to, you know, squeeze down, and it's harder it's going to be to pull the handle down. So keep that in mind, that if you're shooting an over-under and you're using, you know, one of the mech presses, that you don't, you know, you just want to basically constrict or get the collet to constrict it down to the right size, but no more, because there's no point of going smaller. So stick it in the very first station there, pull the handle down, and you can see that's pretty easy. I mean, it didn't take a whole lot of force to do that, but that knocks the primer out, and then the collet comes up and resizes the brass. So let's take a measurement in this thing. You can see the primer's out at this point, and we'll see what this thing is sized down to now. So I am sized down to 808, which is right about what I thought it would be. So I've only sized this thing down, you know, a couple thousandths to get it down, but that hole will now drop into the chamber of my Beretta with no trouble at all. So I move it up into the next position here. What I do, some people will leave it down, leave the hole down. I like to slide it up so it can't, you know, there's no slop and it can't wobble around, because if you have it down, come down and try to hit the thing, it has to basically center itself. I just slide the thing up on the seater here, and pull it down and push, and that basically seats the primer into the hole. So you can see the primer's in. Move it over to the next position here. Now this position here, we're going to be doing the powder, the wad, and the shot all in one position. So we'll pull the lever down, push the bar over, that drops the powder in. I lift it up, grab a wad, and what I like to do, some people will set the wad here and come down onto it. I actually like to push the wad up onto the seater and basically push it into the hole. There's these little wad feeder lip or fingers here that help guide the thing into the hole. But I just, based on experience, and I've done this, you know, many times, I just found that this works easier for me of just taking the wad, pushing it up, and I'm literally putting force up on this thing right now to hold it against that, hold that, and push down and seat the wad. Now, one thing that you'll notice here, and we talked about this before in a previous episode with John about wad seating pressure. I have an indicator here on the mech press, and they all have it, about how much wad pressure you're putting onto the wad. And you'll note here, and I can probably do this, you can see possibly here, that as I push down against that wad, that thing just barely comes up. And in fact, the lower hash mark here is 30 pounds, and I'm just underneath that. I basically just want to see that come up and wiggle to know that I've got the wad seated down against the powder. That's all you need with the plastic wads, is to make sure that wad is touching the powder, that you don't have an air gap there. So as long as I see that movement come up slightly, I know that wad has come down and touched it. And again, it's kind of like set once and don't check it really anymore after that. It's not like, you need to check it every single time to make sure it's in contact. If you make it set the very first time that you go and you change your powder, because you change your powder, you change your volume, change the size of the lower part of the chamber down there or whatever, you check once to make sure your wad is seating against it, and that's it, you're done. So I pull that down, slide that over, that drops the shot down into the hole, and at this point you can see here that I've got a shot right up to the top of the shot cup. We'll get some still shots for that so you can see how high it is. I move the shell over into the next position, which is called pre-crimp. Pull this down and it puts a pre-crimp onto the hole. Some people say, and John's probably going to mention this on his, that you want to be about the size of an eraser on here. For whatever reason, the mech ones are larger than that. I don't know why, but it still ends up working just fine in the end. It could be the eraser diameter thing here is more for the 366s because of their final seating die. Okay, so now I'll take the hole and move it to the very last station, which is the crimp stage, and at this point here it puts the final crimp on the hole, and then also will end up dropping a primer into the number 2 station here for the next hole that we'll load. So you bring this lever down, you can see here, or you probably can't, but you'll take my word for it, that it moved the primer into position and lift, and that is what the final case looks like. So you can see there, in terms of what I was mentioning before about the dished crimp, that's got a little bit of a dish in here. It's not perfectly flat. It's got a little bit of a dish or a little bit of a taper that you can see here. Now the other thing is that the MEC Sizemaster does not do what's called a roll crimp on the outer edge of the hole. It's not bad. I mean, if you look at this thing here, it's fairly flat, but I think the 9000s and the higher end progressives or whatever will have yet another station which will do what's called a roll crimp on the outside of the hole here, which kind of rolls the very top of it, which may assist in autoloaders or pump shotguns in terms of feeding. So I take it, throw it in there, and we're ready to do another one here. So I'll do another one here slowly, and then I'll show you what it kind of looks like at speed, so you can kind of see just exactly how fast you can really go with this thing without slapping it around, but still maintain a fairly good speed. So, okay, so now we're going to go through here and let you see how the Collet sizer works. You can actually see all the anti-seize compound I got around here. It'll become a little more obvious about how this works in a second here when you see this thing operate. So again, we start out with a hole that has the primer inside, the spent primer. Place that into the first position, pull the lever down. You can see the Collet sizer come up and work, knocks the primer out. The primers go into a tray down here underneath, so you're not dumping them all over the place. Lift, and again, I can do that again slowly here. You can really see how this works. The Collet sizer comes up, resizes, and then the fingers open back up and let go of the hole. The 600 has a sizer die that comes down that resizes over the base of the whole entire hole, and then kind of like has a cam that pops it out. I'll move it up again onto the seating stem here for the primer. Pull that down, push. It pushes basically the hole down into the spring-loaded cup here on the seating station and seats the new primer inside the hole. So I'll move in the powder drop at this point here, pull the handle down, push the bar over, I'm going to lift and then pull this out from underneath the seating, the fingers here, but you can see that you now have a little bit of a charge powder there in the bottom of it. So again, move that back into position under the fingers. I like to twist it just to make sure that I'm not jammed up against those things. Pull it down. Ah, crud. You know what? I screwed up. Always want to make sure you use a wad. All right. Pull that down, seat the wad. Again, you can see this indicator come up just a little bit, and then slide the bar over. That drops the shot. And I can't really tip this too far here, but you can see the shot is at the very top of the shot cup. Move over to the next station, which is pre-crimp, and I like to basically put some pressure against this thing to keep it from sliding around, so I'm kind of putting some forward pressure on here. Pull that down, do the pre-crimp, and then again the final crimp position here. We'll move that over, and again I push that, pull down, crimp it, drops the primer, lift, and there's your final crimp. And again, the idea in this case here, I want to make sure that I do not have a hole or I have a slight hole there in the bottom because of the fact that I'm now dishing it. I'm pushing these fingers in, but I'm pushing them in basically too far. There's not enough resistance there because normally these wads are designed for 1 ounce. So the whole entire component stack up that we talked about before, John and I talked about in the previous reloading episode, this doesn't stack up as high as it would if I was throwing 1 ounce of shot or if I was using the right wad to begin with. So I'm going to let you see this looks like it's speed now. The rate that I'm going to reloading here is not, like I said, it's not excessively fast, but it's not really slow either. At the rate that I load, at this rate, I can probably load a box of shot shells, and I've done the math on it, but roughly in about 6 minutes or so. I can reload at this rate about 8 boxes an hour, which is just about my capacity in terms of how long I really want to stick with it. And again, the problem, I would say, of a single stage press is that you're pulling this lever down for every single operation that you're doing. And I'm pulling that lever down, 5 or 6 times, I guess, twice here for each hole that I'm loading. And you'll see when John does his, he pulls that lever down once, and every single hole now has something done to it. So every pull that he gets a hole. And that's why he can reload 100 rounds in roughly 10 minutes, and I can reload 100 rounds in roughly 30 minutes. So he's 3 times faster. I have heard somebody on one of the forums once make a comment about, oh yeah, when I use those presses, I just put a shell into every single location, and they try to turn it into like a poor man's progressive. Don't do that. It's not designed to be, operated that way. Furthermore, you run into a problem here at the center station of, okay, so I'm going to pull the lever down, and I need to drop the powder charge, and I need to pull it again to do the wad, and I need to pull it again to do the shot. But what's happening to all the other holes that are the other shoals or whatever state they happen to be in at that point? You just pre-crimp this thing 3 times, and you crimp that thing 3 times, and you just adjusted your sizer 3 times, and whatever. So I just run it once at a time, but again, you can be fairly quick about what you're doing once you get used to it. So I'll show you here what basically, at speed really looks like with this. And again, it's not too fast, but it's not too slow. So here we go. And you can see I'm not slapping that bar to make it work either. It's all just very methodical. Very simple, very easy. And you want to make sure that you don't, short any position here, that you're not trying to go so quick that you're not pulling the handle down all the way or anything like that, particularly when it comes to seating the seating the primer there. And what I usually do, and I don't know if you noticed it, it's a little thing, but when I go to pick the hole up, I pick it up with my finger by just literally jamming my finger into the hole. And then when I go to grab the wad, I take the wad, and I don't know why, but I'll flick it with my finger to make sure that the fingers are open, and I'll come in from the side here and push up on it, just to make sure that I've got the wad seated properly against the stem. And that's basically what it looks like here, but you can see all these holes are coming out pretty much the same. The Remington holes are all slightly different in terms of height, so some will crimp really well, some maybe not so well. That one's not too bad, it's somewhat dished. But the key thing here that I want to make sure is that they're all closed. There's nothing worse than having a hole that has a hole in the middle here. Depending on the size of your shot, all of a sudden the shot starts rattling out and falling out of your holes and stuff like that. So that's pretty much what it looks like. I think we've covered everything there in terms of reloading on the MEC Sizemaster. Again, this is a Sizemaster. There are other presses that MEC produces. Again, I've had really good luck with the MEC press over the years. Again, this press is 20 years old and still running strong. I haven't quite reached the pain factor yet, I think, in my case of going to a progressive. It may come someday, it may not, I don't know. Right now, like I said, I can reload about 200 shells in about an hour, and I'm shooting about 200 shells or so, give or take, about a week right now. So I'm kind of like right in that, you know, I'll go out and reload for an hour, and that's good enough for a week of time. But if I start shooting more, I'm really thinking, you know, that it's starting to get to the point that, yeah, if you shoot more, you may want to start looking at a progressive. And it's kind of funny, it's the same thing, a problem that people get into, like when you buy a gun safe. You buy a gun safe, and at that time it seems like it's the right size, but over the years you buy more guns, and all of a sudden your safe isn't big enough. The same problem happens with reloaders. You buy a reloader when you first start out. You know, it seems like it has the right capacity, everything's great, and then you start shooting more and more and more. All of a sudden, you know, it's a limiting factor, and you wished you went and did something bigger. So it's kind of hard to judge, you know, what is the right size. You know, so to think about that when you go buy a reloading press or when you go buy a safe. You probably already have learned your lesson from that one. But whether it be a metallic or whether it be shot shell, kind of try to take into consideration what the future might hold for you in terms of you know, your needs, and buy accordingly. You know, maybe it's like, you know, pay once, cry once, or whatever, but keep that in mind. So with that, I think we'll tie this thing up. If you have any questions, you can send them to us at powerfactorshow.com. You can do the email at powerfactorshow@gmail.com. There's also the Facebook, facebook.com/powerfactorshow. I'm getting so used to doing things now, it's not even a challenge. So anyway, and again, submit your responses to our trivia question on those primers. Again, I want the 3 points there. What is unique about those particular primers? What were they designed for, or where were they used? That's question number 2. And what was I doing with them? Again, the previous episodes I have mentioned before what I was shooting. And like I said before, those primers are 40 years old. So that'll give you also another clue a bit about when I was shooting a particular firearm. So, and I want a specific answer for that. And there's really 2 parts there that I'm kind of looking for. So at any rate, and we'll give somebody a hat. So again, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.